The story begins with a girl and her mother. Her mother always told her to be honest because honesty leads to goodness and goodness brings happiness. The girl believed it completely, but life didn't agree. One day, her honesty got her killed. She wakes up on the ground in a different universe. A demon-like creature with horns walks up and tells her not to lie there or her clothes will get dirty and she might catch a cold. She looks up at him, feeling like she could be useful to him in this new place. He leans down and kisses her. She presses her hands against the ground, flustered, and says he told her not to lie there. He grins and says, "I did, but you're too cute. Let's take this somewhere better, like my place." The scene opens in her boss's office. She's sitting across from him as he delivers the news. She's losing her job. Stunned, she stares at him, trying to process. Didn't she just help the company by exposing a major issue? Her boss leans forward and explains that the person she reported is an important figure in the company. He asks if she understands how much the company could lose if those people face consequences. She tries to explain herself, saying she only did what was right, but he cuts her off and says it's better if she leaves quietly. He even adds, "You should be thankful it's ending here." With a forced smile, he wishes her well and tells her to be careful on her way home. Later that evening, she's walking home feeling defeated. Her thoughts are racing as she wonders how things got so unfair. People who do wrong walk free, while those who speak up face the consequences. Frustrated, she shouts into the night, "Life isn't fair." It feels strangely good, and she's relieved no one is around to hear her. She thinks about how she could never work in a place so corrupt. As she walks through a dark alley, someone comes up behind her and hits her hard. She falls to the ground, feeling pain and confusion. The man tells her she made a mistake by speaking out. Before she can react, he attacks her again and leaves her injured. She lies there in the cold, bleeding, as snow begins to fall. Her mind is overwhelmed with thoughts. Was she supposed to stay silent and accept corruption? No, that's not who she is. She remembers the promise she made to stand up against injustice. In her mind, she sees the doll her mother gave her, almost as if it's telling her to stay strong and keep fighting. The doll tells her to open her eyes and decide how she wants to live. When she does, she finds herself in a beautifully furnished room. She looks around, confused but impressed. Her clothes are elegant, her wounds still hurt, and she remembers being attacked. She wonders if the room belongs to the person who saved her and decides they must be rich. As she walks toward a wardrobe to look for her bag, she catches her reflection in a mirror and freezes. Her hair is blue, long enough to nearly touch the floor. Her eyes are a different color, and her body looks slightly older and stronger. The door opens, and a tall man with horns walks in. She greets him nervously, assuming he saved her. He asks how she's feeling, towering over her with his pointy ears and massive frame. She asks who he is, and he sighs, telling her not to mess with him. She thinks she's being serious, but he seems frustrated. He mutters about her being attacked, reaches out to check her head, and moves his hand lower to check her injuries. Shocked, she slaps him hard, hurting her own hand more than his face. He looks at her calmly and tells her to take it easy. Flustered, she says he shouldn't touch her when she doesn't even know him. He frowns, clearly irritated, and asks if she's serious. She insists she doesn't know him. Frustrated, he calls for a doctor, muttering about something being wrong with her. A tall, friendly-looking woman enters the room. Relieved, she asks to talk to the doctor alone. The man hesitates but eventually steps out after some persuasion. The next morning, she wakes up suddenly, thinking she's late for work, only to remember she's already been fired. She sighs and lies back down, but then it hits her. Work shouldn't even be her main concern right now. She jumps up, touching her face and wondering if she's still dreaming. A knock on the door startles her. She's scared it might be him. A voice asks to come in, and she recognizes it as the doctor's. She tells her to enter. Chloe steps in and says she'll examine her now, asking for her permission. She agrees, and Chloe removes the bandages, mentioning how well her healing spell worked. The word spell makes her pause, but she doesn't interrupt. Chloe asks if she remembers anything yet, and when she says no, the doctor reintroduces herself, explaining that she's her personal doctor, assigned by Master Lex. She also explains that she's a pixie and can use various spells, including healing. The girl listens, confused, unable to recall anything. Chloe tells her not to force it, suggesting she take things slow. She hands her breakfast and advises her to eat, take a warm bath, and rest. Standing on the balcony later, she watches the snow fall and people pass by. She notices everyone down below has horns like Lex and thinks about how he might come back. The breakfast was good, but her mind is too full to enjoy it. She remembers Lex calling her his fiancé and decides she needs to run away. He's too terrifying to stay near. Out of nowhere, a stone flies past her face. Looking down, she sees demons throwing stones at her, calling her a fairy and mocking her. She's too stunned to move, fearing they'll hurt her. Suddenly, a hand grabs her from behind and pulls her inside. It's Lex. He shuts the door and kneels in front of her. "Are you okay?" he asks. She's sitting on the floor, curled up tightly, still trembling in fear. The next morning, she wakes up suddenly, thinking she's late for work. Then she remembers she doesn't even have a job anymore. She sighs, deciding to go back to sleep, but something snaps her out of it. She jumps up, realizing that work should be the least of her worries right now. She touches her face, wondering if this is all just a weird dream. A knock on the door interrupts her thoughts, making her heart race. What if it's him? The voice that follows is softer. It's the doctor's. Relieved, she tells her to come in. Chloe walks in and says it's time to examine her, asking if it's okay. She nods, and Chloe carefully removes the bandages, mentioning how powerful her healing spell is. The word spell catches her off guard, but she stays quiet. Chloe notices her confusion and asks if she remembers anything yet. When she shakes her head, Chloe introduces herself again, explaining she's her personal doctor assigned by Master Lex. She also mentions that she's a pixie with magical abilities like healing spells. The girl listens, completely lost, unable to recall anything. Chloe tells her not to stress about remembering everything at once and suggests taking things slow. She gives her breakfast, advising her to eat, take a warm bath, and rest. The kindness eases her nerves a bit, and she feels grateful for Chloe's calm demeanor. Later, she steps onto the balcony on the second floor, watching the snow fall. The cold bites at her, but she tells herself she'll head back inside soon. She looks down at the street and notices that everyone walking by has horns, just like Lex. Her thoughts drift to him. He's bound to show up again. She tries to focus on the food Chloe brought. It tastes good, but her mind won't let her enjoy it. Lex calling her his fiancé keeps replaying in her head. She decides it's all too much. Running away might be her only option. Suddenly, a stone whizzes past her face. Startled, she looks down and sees a group of demons throwing stones at her, calling her the fairy from yesterday. They laugh as they aim for her again. Fear freezes her in place as she wonders if they'll hurt her. Before she can react, a hand grabs her from behind and pulls her inside. It's Lex. He looks her over quickly and asks if she's okay. Shaken, she sits on the floor, hugging her knees tightly, trembling from both fear and shock. She asks him why they're attacking her. He tells her that they're people who despise witches and pixies, but assures her that he'll send soldiers to deal with them. He tells her not to open the door again and, as he walks away, says he'll be back soon. She watches him go. He's scary, but at least he seems nicer than the people outside. Taking Chloe's advice, she decides to calm down. Stepping into the bathroom, she can't help but admire its elegance. Everything is so detailed, so luxurious, and it makes her feel a little calmer. She sinks into the warm water, letting the soothing heat relax her. It's the first time in a while she feels like she can breathe. As she leans back, her mind starts to piece things together. She tries to remember when all of this started. The day she was fired from her job. She had reported a corruption scheme, thinking she was doing the right thing, but instead, she lost everything. Then, the attack. Someone had stabbed her, and she had been certain she was going to die. But somehow, here she is, alive and in this strange new place. And Lex, he had told her she was his fiancé. She still can't wrap her head around that. He also mentioned her helping him kill evildoers. The more she thinks about it, the more confused she becomes. Deciding to stop overthinking, she lets it go for now. There's no logic to any of this, and trying to make sense of it is giving her a headache. For now, she just wants to relax in the bath. there are still so many questions in her mind. How did she even end up here? What's her next step? How does she get back to her world? And even if she does, will they just try to kill her again? She's unemployed, no job to return to. Nothing. Everything feels like it's spiraling out of control, and she has no idea how to fix it. Suddenly, the door creaks open. Her heart skips a beat. Lex steps in, looking calm as usual. He glances at her and says he's glad she's still here, his voice a little softer than before. She's shocked that he just walked in like that. She immediately starts splashing water at him, telling him to leave. He tries to calm her down, explaining why he's there, but she doesn't want to listen. She keeps splashing him, shouting for him to go away. Now drenched, he grabs her hand and asks if she got him all wet so he would bathe with her. She quickly says no. He's still holding her hand, and she gets so nervous she starts shivering. He notices and lets go. He tells her reaction is making him sad. Despite how she's reacting, he says he's still going to finish his bath since she got him all wet. He starts undressing. She can't believe what she's seeing and immediately turns away, covering her eyes. She asks why he's taking his clothes off in front of her. He casually replies that she's already used to seeing it. This is just the first time she's seeing it up close. She remembers seeing it online, but this is way different. He notices she's still covering her eyes and tells her she'll have to get used to it. She insists she can't. Procents. Standing up from the tub, she says she's going to change in her room and warns him not to try to follow. He agrees as she walks away, wrapping a towel around herself. After some time, he walks into the room. She's already dressed, but he's still wrapped in a towel. She asks why he hasn't changed yet. He reminds her that his clothes are soaked because of her. She suggests he wear something else instead. As she sits down, she starts complaining about her situation, blaming everything on him, the male lead. She talks about feeling trapped and how she's sure she'll be eaten alive and die in this strange place. He overhears her and laughs at her dramatic take on what he said the day before. She turns to him annoyed and asks if he finds her fear funny. He's calm now and explains that she misunderstood him. When he said eating her, he didn't mean it the way she thought. Before she can process his words, he leans in and kisses her. Suddenly, she understands what he meant, but she's not ready for this. She pulls back and asks him to stop. She tells him that she doesn't know him and isn't comfortable with it. He steps back, sadness in his eyes, and asks how long she plans to keep her distance. She looks at him, noticing the sorrow on his face. He starts to walk away, giving her space. She feels a pang of sympathy for him. He seems to genuinely care for her in this world, but she's still confused. She doesn't know him and doesn't know how to handle any of this. He turns to her and introduces himself. He's the Demon King, Alexander Thammuz, but he tells her to call him Lex. She's surprised by the sudden introduction, but tells him her name is Lily Astor. He already knows that, of course. He then tells her she's his fiancé, which shocks her. She's been single for 28 years in her previous world and can't believe she suddenly has a fiancé here. She chides herself, thinking she can't be proud of that, especially since her so-called fiancé is a demon. She asks him why she should marry him. He tells her there are many reasons, but the most important one is that he needs her to help cleanse the demon realm of evil. He explains that he wants to change the image people have of demons, who are often seen as nothing but evil. He adds that he wants his realm to be free of that evil. As he speaks, she realizes they share the same view. He continues, saying that she used to have a spell that could detect evil before it happened. She's surprised. She can't believe her ears. He tells her she had a lot of powerful spells at her disposal. He asks if she remembers how to cast the most basic one, but she says no. He's not surprised and tells her it would have taken a long time to master, and then, just as she did, they attacked her. He believes she needs to start learning magic from scratch since she's forgotten everything. She's starting to understand little by little. She asks if she was attacked because she tried to make the country better. He confirms that. She sees the similarities. It's just like her old world. She tells him she hates evil too and offers her help. It would be nice to use a spell like that. There was no magic in her old world, so here would be totally different, a new experience. She says she has to be able to use that spell again. He's glad they share the same opinion, at least in that regard. He smiles and tells her there's another important thing she needs to know. Their wedding is in a week. This news shocks her. She agrees that she hates evildoers, so she'll gladly help him, but she thinks they're moving too fast. She says they don't need to get married just yet. He looks at her, almost in disbelief. He tells her the wedding has been planned for a long time, so it wouldn't be appropriate to delay it any further. He then adds that there's another reason they should marry. He has a ring that can protect her, but it can only be used once they're married. He continues, telling her that even though she doesn't remember him or love him, the marriage must still happen. Holding her hand, he says he doesn't want to see her hurt again. She looks at him, speechless, and says she has a lot of questions but doesn't even know where to begin. He tells her she can ask anything. First, she asks who she is. He tells her she's a pixie. She asks again if demons can marry someone like her. He answers yes, there are many interracial marriages. She raises a concern about their size difference, and he smiles, reassuring her not to worry. He tells her they've done it before. She's confused and says she doesn't understand. He tries to explain, but she refuses to agree. "I've never done it before," she says. He kisses her hair and expresses how grateful he is that she's still alive. He confesses he can't live without her. Holding her face, he says that despite everything, how she acts and expresses herself hasn't changed, even though she must have forgotten. She likes the way he's being kind, but suddenly he becomes furious. "Losing your memory is something I can never forgive," he says. He adds that he's already taken the life of the person who hurt her. She looks at him, feeling a chill, and starts to feel less impressed with his kindness. Now he's starting to look scary. She doesn't believe he actually killed them. "Wasn't that too harsh?" she asks. He tells her there's no mercy for anyone who tries to harm her. She still doesn't think it was the right call, believing there must have been another way to punish them. He remains firm, saying his actions were justified. She asks who the people were, wondering if she knew them. "Did I do something wrong?" she asks. He assures her that she didn't do anything wrong, explaining that the person who attacked her was a follower of the old order. He goes on to explain that the old demonic order taught that if you wanted something, you had to take it by force. But ever since his father took over, the law changed. Most citizens prefer the new order because it brought peace, and it focuses more on cooperation with other races. However, some people were dissatisfied with the change, so they formed their own group. That group targeted her because she's a pixie, she uses spells, and she's his fiancé. He tells her to stay put and not go anywhere until their wedding day, promising he'll protect her with everything he has. He becomes tired and stops, saying he wants to rest. He hasn't slept in 3 days because he's been searching for the person who hurt her. Lying down, he says he'll rest today. She asks why he's lying on her bed. He reminds her that it's also his room. She tells him they're not married yet. He looks at her, puzzled, wondering why she's being so stubborn. He says they've always slept together before, and he promised to protect her. She replies that she doesn't want to sleep with him. He's taken off his shirt again, which makes her uncomfortable. Deciding she'd rather sleep on the sofa, she starts to get up, but he grabs her hand and drags her closer. She struggles, not liking it. He tells her the more she struggles, the tighter he'll hold her. She asks why he's forcing her and what he would do if she told him she doesn't remember anything about him and has never lived in this world. He's shocked. She goes on, telling him that she doesn't belong here, that she was just a regular employee. She explains that she reported a corrupt scheme at her office, got fired, and was attacked. When she woke up, he sits up, thinking. He tells her that her storybooks must have gotten mixed up in her head. She insists she's telling the truth. Frustrated, she knows he won't believe her, and she had a feeling telling him wouldn't make a difference. He tries to make sense of the scenario she described about her old world. He says that since she got hurt because of her attitude, she should marry him. She looks at him, thinking it over. It seems like he really does care for her. It's not like she hates him either. Sure, he looks scary, but he's also quite handsome. And his body is seriously muscular and tan. He snaps her out of her thoughts. He says her eyes are practically stabbing him, asking if she remembers anything from the way she stared at him. She says no, she was just thinking, and apologizes for making him feel forgotten. He's surprised and reminds her that she's his fiancé. She says she knows, but she's just worried because she can't remember anything. He smiles and hugs her, telling her that the most important thing is that she's still alive. He held her tightly and refused to let go, saying he wouldn't risk her getting hurt again. She complained he didn't need to touch her to protect her, but he ignored her protests. She accused him of being angry because she couldn't use magic or recognize him. He calmly replied that he wasn't angry, just sad she had forgotten everything, but he promised to help her remember and make her fall for him again. When she asked what he meant by continuing to do what they'd always done, he leaned closer, teasing her. She panicked and said she didn't want to know. Amused, he laid her down, tucked her under the blanket, and told her to sleep. She protested that it was still bright out, but he insisted she should stay and keep him company while he rested. When she pointed out she'd never shared a bed with a man before, he casually replied she'd get used to it. Removing her hairpin, he reminded her to stay warm. She noticed his lack of a shirt and questioned it. He explained he always felt hot, even in winter, which was why he didn't bother buttoning his shirts properly either. She didn't bother responding, telling him good night instead. He sighed, disappointed she didn't have more questions, out, and she rolled her eyes under the blanket, already regretting agreeing to this arrangement. 15 minutes later, she was still wide awake. After all, she'd already slept too much the day before. Even with the blanket wrapped tightly around her, she felt cold. He noticed her trembling and asked what was wrong, startling her. She thought he was asleep. He admitted that with everything on his mind, sleeping wasn't so easy. She told him to turn off the AC. He looked confused and asked what she meant. When she explained, he chuckled, saying there wasn't any AC in this world. She sighed and said she just felt really cold. He smiled and told her it was because she was so small, adding that when she got cold before, she'd hug his arm while he held her close to keep her warm. Without thinking, she grabbed his arm. He blinked, surprised, as she snuggled against it. He was so warm, reminding her of the giant teddy bear she had back home. But then she stopped herself. She couldn't talk about her past life. She quickly backtracked, claiming she just remembered a doll from her memory. She asked him if she'd ever had one before. He told her she hadn't, which made her feel awkward. Turning her back to him, she wondered why she'd even hugged him in the first place. He reassured her, saying that if she remembered anything, no matter how small, she should tell him. It might be important. She agreed, and he hugged her gently, telling her to get some rest. 3 years ago, in what felt like a dream, she saw herself in a room with him. He asked if she was sad, but she shook her head and said she was happy to be with him. She added that she didn't feel alone anymore, which made him look genuinely surprised. Holding her face, he asked if she realized what it meant to share a room with him. His voice carried a playful warning as he said he wouldn't be able to stop himself from touching her. She laughed, brushing off his teasing, and said it was fine, since she loved him. He raised an eyebrow, asking if she had any other thoughts in mind. She fired back that he was the one thinking like that. She glanced around the room, taking in the dark and heavy decor. She casually mentioned that it needed some changes, something brighter, more her style. He told her it was her room too, so she could do as she liked. Still smiling, she assured him she'd always feel at ease as long as they were together. But then he asked if she wasn't bothered by how she ended up there, how he had essentially kidnapped her. She froze for a moment, visibly shaken. When he asked if she was okay, she claimed she was just tired. He didn't press further and suggested they rest. Leading her to the bed, he reminded her again, this was her space now, too. She's shocked to hear she'll actually be sharing a room with him. He confirms it, saying it's to keep her under his protection. She teases him, asking why it has to be him. He grins and replies that it's because he loves her, and because he doesn't want her escaping. Without waiting for another word, he picks her up and carries her to the bed. She insists she's not planning to run away, but he just smirks and suggests they take a bath first. In the bathroom, she finds herself scrubbing his back. His broad back feels like an endless canvas, and she can't help but complain about how much work it takes. He'd told her earlier that she didn't need to help, but she'd insisted. Leaning against him briefly, she feels the warmth of his skin and tells him they should focus on the kingdom first. There's too much chaos right now to think about anything else. He nods, agreeing, but adds that once things settle down, he plans to marry her. As they finish up, he yawns and suggests heading to bed. He's clearly exhausted, and she agrees, eager to rest after the long day. Later, lying on the bed, she gets comfortable, enjoying the soft blankets. Just as she's about to drift off, he leans over and kisses her. Startled, she reminds him he said he was sleepy. He smirks and admits that whenever she's beside him, sleep becomes impossible. He confesses he can't wait for her to become his wife. She tells him to be patient, it'll happen soon enough. But his impatience shows as he draws closer, starting to get a little too intimate. She jolts awake, heart racing. It takes her a moment to realize it was all just a dream. Everything had felt so vivid. The warmth, the closeness, the kisses. She shakes her head, trying to push the memory away. Looking over, she sees him still asleep beside her. Her cheeks flush as she remembers that, while they're sharing a bed, nothing had actually happened. She sits up and watches him briefly. He looks utterly exhausted, and she remembers he hadn't slept for 3 days while searching for her attacker. Deciding not to stare too long, she gets up and stretches. Her mind wanders to the upcoming wedding, only a few days away. She sighs, realizing she doesn't have much of a choice. It's her reality now. But she needs a distraction, anything to keep her thoughts away from the looming marriage. She tries to remember what she used to do to relax after work in her old life. Slowly, bits and pieces come back to her. Hobbies, routines, little joys. Maybe she could bring some of that into this new world. Anything to help her feel a little more like herself. She dismisses her ideas as unrealistic and heads to the wardrobe, hoping to find something interesting. She spots beautiful dresses and wonders if they're all hers, still amazed even though she'd seen them before. She checks the next wardrobe and finds brooms and cleaning supplies. Amused, she assumes he must like cleaning too. Deciding to pass time, she plans to clean the room, but changes into practical clothes first, settling for something short and tight. Relieved that he's still asleep, she begins cleaning. Hours later, the room shines. As she's putting the cleaning supplies away, she accidentally kicks over a bucket of water. Panicking, she raises her hands, and the water freezes solid. He wakes up, asking about the noise. She hesitates, confused by what just happened. He points out that her magic still works. She denies it, saying it was an accident. He encourages her to try again, bringing water for her to practice with. She reluctantly attempts, but nothing happens. He laughs, saying she just needs practice. Annoyed, she says it's impossible and insists the first time was a fluke. He tells her she used to do this often. She dismisses his claim, joking that if she could control ice, she'd freeze him for laughing. He quickly stops, but the amused look on his face remains. He asks why she's wearing those clothes, calling it a school uniform. Surprised, she explains she didn't realize it was a uniform and only picked it because it had a short skirt, which made cleaning easier. She tells him she wanted to keep busy and loves cleaning. He smiles, saying her love for cleaning hasn't changed, and adds that she even stored cleaning supplies in the wardrobe herself. Shocked, she can't believe it was her doing. He offers to get her more short skirts if she wants, but she quickly refuses, asking instead for sewing equipment and fabrics. Amused, he leads her to a closet filled with needles, threads, and fabrics she had apparently hoarded before. As she sorts through the supplies, she thinks about sewing clothes inspired by her old world, princess-like dresses she loved from Sunday cartoons, but also comfortable everyday outfits. Grinning, he says if she makes short skirts, but she'd better wear them only in their room. He wraps his arms around her, teasing that her school uniform looks even more attractive on her now, probably because it fits tightly in certain areas. She pushes him away, flustered, insisting she's never been comfortable wearing short skirts outside anyway. He feels relieved and claims he's the only one allowed to see her in outfits like that. He's still holding her and jokingly wonders if part of her body grew bigger since the uniform looks so snug. She scolds him to stop, but he laughs and says her voice is too sweet, warning her he could pounce at any moment. Embarrassed and uncomfortable, she tries to pull away. Suddenly, his stomach growls loudly, breaking the tension. Trying to save face, he stands up, announcing he'll ask the servants to bring food. She raises an eyebrow and teases him, saying, "For someone who claims to be dangerous, your biggest weakness seems to be an empty stomach." She tells him she'll go take a bath first. He smirks and asks if she wants him to join her. She quickly shuts him down, saying he's not allowed in the bathroom without her permission. He teases her, telling her to lock the door then. She agrees, but suddenly remembers the lock is too high for her to reach. Embarrassed, she begs him to stop teasing. He laughs and says it's hard to stop when she's so beautiful. Later, as they eat, she takes a bite and comments that the food is amazing. He grins proudly, claiming it should be since they have the best cooks in the world. She studies him, her gaze lingering, making him pause. He asks if something's wrong. She tilts her head and asks if he's really a king. Confused, he nods and asks why she's questioning it. She chuckles, pointing out how unkingly he seems, sitting on the floor to eat, licking his fingers and acting so casual. He laughs, clearly amused, and says he doesn't need to act formal when it's just the two of them. If it bothers her, though, he promises to try being more kingly. She shakes her head, saying there's no need. It's his home, and he should feel comfortable. She's just a guest. As she watches him, she thinks he acts more like a mafia boss than a king. He catches her expression and chuckles, admitting he wouldn't have chosen to be king if he'd had a choice. Being a regular citizen would have been easier. Taking care of people, he says, can be exhausting, but then he smirks and adds, "Luckily, I'm not the kind of king who licks boots, just my fingers." He looks at her and asks if she knows what his greatest wish is. Curious, she asks him. Smiling, he tells her that his dream is to live with her in a quiet rural village, raising lots of children together. He adds that she was the one who wanted him to become king, so he could make the kingdom and the world a better place. Holding her hands, he promises to fulfill that dream, protect her, and make her happy. Even if she's forgotten, he hasn't. He hands her a book, explaining it's about the history of pixies and might help jog her memory. She takes it and promises to give it a try. Changing the subject, she asks about his plans for the day. He shrugs, saying he'll mostly laze around. Surprised, she asks why he isn't working. Grinning, he says he's technically on marriage leave, though some tasks, like finding the one who hurt her, still require his attention. She quickly changes the topic, not wanting to think about punishment or killing, and asks what she can do to help with the wedding. He assures her everything's already prepared, as they started planning long before she lost her memory. All she has to do is wait. Still curious, she asks him to explain the event. He agrees, breaking it all down for her step by step. Later, she starts reading the book, but only gets through the first page. It reads like a fantasy novel, and she can't believe something like this could exist. She wonders if this world is even real. Noticing her tired expression, he asks if it's too much for her. She admits it's overwhelming. He tells her not to push herself if it's too hard, and she agrees. Looking at the cover, she asks if she ever had wings like the pixie in the illustration. He laughs softly, telling her, "Not exactly, but you always had a way of making people believe you could fly." He tells her he's not surprised she asked about the wings. The atmosphere in the room suddenly feels heavy. She quickly adds that if the question makes him uncomfortable, he doesn't have to answer. He agrees, holding his head in his hands, the question reminding him of a terrible accident, one that was entirely his fault. His mood darkens. She tells him not to worry about her question. Though she doesn't believe she ever had wings, she doesn't really remember how it would feel to have them, so it doesn't matter. Before the conversation can continue, a knock on the door interrupts them. A voice from the other side apologizes for disturbing her rest, introducing themselves as Kenzo and Arion, saying they have something important to report to him. The male lead scratches his head, realizing his holiday has ended. He asks her who they are, then remembers she doesn't remember them either. He tells her to come along so he can introduce them again. He opens the door, and the two men stand outside. They comment that they weren't expecting the door to open so soon. Both of them bow deeply, greeting him respectfully. He tells them he hopes they've come with good news. Arion, the one with green hair, says they bring both good and bad news. The male lead asks for the bad news first. Arion explains that the bad news is that the male lead must go with them, while Kenzo will stay and keep watch. Then he moves on to the good news. Their task here will be quick, only taking an hour or two. The male lead scratches his head, saying he'll go prepare himself. Then he remembers he needs to introduce her to them. He tells her to come along so he can make the introductions. He first introduces her to Kenzo, the one with brown hair. Kenzo greets her and comments that she's even more beautiful up close. He introduces himself, mentioning he's 18 and has been here for a year, though he only joined this division a few weeks ago. She notices he's younger than her but very tall. He extends his hand for a handshake. He tells her that he heard she's suffering from amnesia, but that they've never met before. He's happy to finally meet her. The male lead looks furious and asks what Kenzo is trying to do. Kenzo quickly pulls his hand back and apologizes, explaining that he's a big fan of the male lead, so he's also a fan of the people he cares about. The male lead warns him not to touch her again or he'll be fired. Kenzo apologizes profusely. He then introduces Arion to her. Arion greets her, saying they've actually met before, though she's forgotten. He continues, explaining that he's been the male lead's advisor and guardian since he was a child, and he's seen her when she was younger as well. This surprises her. She notices that Arion doesn't have any horns like the others, and while he's still tall, his body isn't as big. He tells her he's an elf, though he has some demonic traits because of his lineage. She asks if he's older than the male lead, since he mentioned watching over him as a child. He replies that he's 7 years older than the male lead. She finds this hard to believe. He then adds with a smile that he's even had to clean up after the male lead when he was a kid. The male lead defends himself, saying it's a lie and that she shouldn't believe Arion. Our girl looks at both of them. Arion looks much younger than the male lead, and she wonders why the male lead needs guards when he's clearly much bigger than both of them. He announces that he's the strongest one there, so he doesn't truly need guards. But he says his guards are also her guards, and they're there to protect her when he can't be by her side. He tells them he'll go prepare. He's dressed and ready. He comes to her room to inform her that he's leaving. He says Kenzo will stand guard outside her room, so she should stay inside. She agrees. He asks if she wants him to bring more books. She tells him to do so, as she has nothing else to do and more books would be nice. He moves closer and tells her that he really doesn't want to go. Even though she's guarded, he's still worried about her safety. He kisses her, and she tells him to stop. He teases her, saying it's just a kiss. As he walks away, he says he'll be right back and advises her to take care of herself. She watches him leave, her heart racing. He tells Kenzo at the door to protect his fiancé. As he leaves with Arion, she watches them go. Normally, she'd feel relieved, but instead, it's as if she's lost something. She tells Kenzo she's going back to her room. He tells her to have a good rest. Just then, a maid calls out to Kenzo, saying he's needed in the servants' room. He feels reluctant and says he's assigned to her room, but the maid insists there's no time. She tells him to go, saying she'll protect our girl. Kenzo agrees and quickly leaves, apologizing to her as he goes. The maid tells her to go back to the room. As our girl turns to leave, the maid pulls out a rod and is about to strike her. They're in a dark place. 2 people are talking about the female lead. A female voice asks if they're sure they've got the right person. A male voice answers, saying yes, she's the male lead's fiancé. Our girl slowly starts to wake up. The female voice adds that she knows the person they have is the male lead's fiancé, but since she's lost her memory, she's unsure if she can still perform the task. The male voice reassures her that it's just her memory that's gone. She'll still be able to cast her spells. Our girl fully wakes up, confused. Who are these people? What's happening? She tries to move but realizes her arms and legs are tied. The man looks in her direction and says she's awake. The maid, who was supposed to protect her earlier, is standing nearby, and the man is behind bars, looking like the male lead. He demands that she get him out of there immediately, now that she's awake. She's still confused, and the maid explains that her spell is needed to open the cells, and she's the only one who can do it. Our girl tries to process the information. The man tells her to stop playing dumb and release him. He warns her that no matter how loud she screams, no one will hear her. This is the deepest part of the dungeon, where even the guards rarely go. She insists she can't use magic. The maid reminds the man that she's lost her memories. The man asks if the maid is taking the girl's side. Our girl replies that even if she remembered, she wouldn't free him, since he must have been locked up for doing something evil. The man's face twists with anger as he orders the maid to bring her closer. Our girl's heart races with fear as she's dragged toward him. She has no idea what he's planning, and that terrifies her. He grabs her chin roughly, tilting her head up to meet his gaze. His voice is cold as he tells her she's nothing but a nuisance, just like the male lead. Then, with a smirk, he adds that at least she's beautiful. He wonders aloud how the male lead would react if he kissed her. Our girl stares at him, terrified. Suddenly, a strange light begins to glow above her head. The man's expression shifts to confusion as he watches the light above her. He steps back slightly and demands to know what she's done to him. She's just as confused and reminds him that she doesn't even know how to use magic. Before he can react further, there's a swift movement, and something slices him from behind her. It's the male lead's sword, and he looks absolutely furious. His voice is sharp as he asks the man if he really has a death wish. Our girl quickly steps back, away from the scene as the man's blood starts to spill. She watches in shock, wondering if he's dead, her mind racing to keep up with what just happened. The male lead's anger is still evident. He turns to the maid and asks if she's the one who brought our girl here. The maid, visibly scared, asks for forgiveness, saying the man threatened her. He's not listening and tells her she'll have to die too. Our girl, still on the floor, begs him not to kill her. He tells her the maid put her in danger, so she deserves to die. But our girl insists the maid was only acting under threat, so she shouldn't be killed. The male lead still doesn't seem convinced. He asks her if she can really trust someone who tried to hurt her. He tells her to stay away if she doesn't want to witness what will happen next. She keeps begging him, trying to move, but her legs are still bound. She struggles, but it's no use. Slowly, she feels her strength slipping away. Her body feels heavy, and her vision starts to blur. She falls to the ground. This alarms the male lead, and he rushes to her side. She feels so tired and cold as if her body is freezing. He gently holds her face, and she feels his warmth. For a brief moment, she feels like she's holding her doll. Suddenly, she wakes up. She's in bed, surprised to see that it was the male lead's hand that was so warm. She finds herself in the room, lying on the bed. The male lead is standing above her, watching with a relieved look on his face. He's happy that she's awake. She asks him what happened to her, and he tells her that she was unconscious and cold for 2 days after the incident. She's surprised. He decides to go and get the doctor. After a while of examination, the doctor explains that she unleashed a spell when her body wasn't stable yet, which is why she passed out. She decides to give her vitamins to help her recover her strength and informs her that her body is still too cold. She should eat warm meals and drink warm fluids to help her recover. Our girl wonders why she gets so cold easily when she can use ice spells. The male lead tells her that she's always been like this, even before everything happened. The doctor suggests he help warm her up, and the male lead agrees. The doctor leaves. They're left alone, and our girl asks him how he knew she was in the dungeon. He shows her hairpin, explaining that he found it on the floor, far from her room. Then he saw strange eyes appearing on the walls. When he got closer to the dungeon, he saw more ice, so he figured she'd be there. She asks about the 2 people in the dungeon, and he tells her that the man was killed. He adds that the man deserved it, and he would gladly get his hands dirty if it meant a brighter future for the kingdom. He also tells her that the girl escaped, mentioning that she'd only been here for a few months, but already knew all the shortcuts. He offers her a drink, telling her to take it, as she's not just going to be a queen, but his wife too. Anyone who tries to hurt her deserves to die. She takes the drink and silently begins to sip it. He continues, saying that he was so worried something bad might happen to her. He starts to come closer to her, but then stops, saying that she needs to regain her strength first. Deciding to spoon-feed her, he insists. She protests, saying she doesn't want him to do that. After she finishes eating, he asks how she's feeling. She replies that she's okay and then asks about Kenzo. She wonders if there was really a problem in the servant's room that day. He tells her no, the maid lied, and that's why he punished Kenzo for being careless enough to let her get kidnapped. She doesn't like it and begs him to free Kenzo, insisting that he didn't do anything wrong. He tells her that no matter what she says, the punishment is final. She insists that she'll go and meet him, but he laughs and tells her she doesn't even know where he's being kept. She says she'll find him anyway. Getting annoyed, he comments that she's becoming stubborn. He feels it's too dangerous for her to go alone and decides to take her there. They arrive at the room where Kenzo is being kept. When Kenzo sees them, he prostrates himself and begs for forgiveness. She looks at him with compassion and tells him it's not his fault. He comments on her kindness and then realizes she called him Ken. He's touched by her gesture. She tells him to lift his head. The male lead tells Kenzo that he will still have to face his punishment. Kenzo replies that he'll gladly accept it. Our girl tries to intervene, but the male lead is firm. He believes Kenzo needs to be punished so he won't be careless in the future. Kenzo tells her it's all right and that he'd feel guilty if he wasn't punished at all. He admits it's his fault for being so careless. The male lead holds her and tells her they should go back to her room, saying she shouldn't leave until after their marriage. Our girl agrees, thinking that the incident the other day really scared her, and staying in her room feels like the best choice for now. If you're eager for the next chapter, drop a comment expressing your interest in a part 2. Don't forget to subscribe and ensure to hit the notification bell to stay updated. Until next time.